We are in the book of Genesis again this summer, and I urge you to pay close attention to these stories. Sibling rivalry and family feuds are scattered throughout the book of Genesis, and we would do well to notice what they suggest, what they support, and what they sanction. We get a lot of our archetypes and understandings of the world from this first book of the Bible. There's the creation story, the flood story, and numerous stories of brothers killing brothers. These stories are often taken as commentary on the ways of the world and the ways things are. Pay attention to how these themes and these patterns track with your own life and your own understandings of God. Last Sunday, we wrestled with Jacob as he wrestled with the angel. And this morning, we continue Jacob's journey with Jacob's sons. Recall that Jacob is Esau's younger brother. Recall that Jacob stole his brother's birthright and fled with his wives, his maids, and his children. Recall that God renames Jacob Israel and promises to make his descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. Recall that Jacob's mother and God favored Jacob over his older brother, and notice that Jacob favors Joseph over his older brothers. Favoritism, younger over older. It's a repeated theme in Genesis that leads to plots of murder. Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, and today Joseph and his brothers. Jacob repeats the pattern of favoritism from his own childhood and sets his son Joseph up for hatred and scorn. Jacob favors Joseph, but Jacob's sons hate Joseph. The plot to kill a brother captures our attention this morning. Joseph's story, though full of twists and turns and ups and downs, ends well. His brothers dump him in a pit and sell him into slavery, as we read this morning. Joseph is a slave in Egypt who rises to serve in the home of a powerful Egyptian. An accusation of wrongdoing finds him imprisoned again, but he rises to power once more because of his dreams and his ability to interpret them. Joseph's story in Egypt ends with him in a position to save his father and his brothers when famine threatens their lives. He goes on to forgive his brothers for the harm they caused him, saying, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Not everyone can say that about the trouble in their lives, but Joseph survives a plot to murder him. He survives slavery and imprisonment to become the right-hand man of the most powerful person in Egypt, the Pharaoh. His story ends well. Jeff Henderson, has anyone heard of Jeff Henderson? An award-winning chef, Food Network star, award-winning author, and renowned public speaker. Chef Jeff is also a former drug dealer, a convicted felon who spent a decade in prison. He says that he had a vision as a drug dealer, but it was the wrong vision. He says in prison, he shifted his negative focus to a positive focus. He found a passion and he followed it. He committed to it. Chef Jeff became the first African-American executive chef at the elegant Bellagio restaurant in Las Vegas. His story of imprisonment, like Joseph's story of imprisonment, ends well. I have had the experience of a loved one in prison, and the story so far has not ended well. When I got the phone call, it made my world stand still. I was on my way to a funeral when the word of arrest and imprisonment came, and it literally brought me to my knees. It was weeks before I saw my family member again, and like Jacob, missing his favorite son, Joseph, I felt like someone had died while I went on living. Waiting for a loved one to get out of prison on bond or to finish serving a sentence can leave you feeling like someone has died. As we spend this summer considering our responsibility as people of faith in God's household, one line from Brother Judah just makes my skin crawl as I imagine Joseph, like my loved one, sitting imprisoned in a pit. You might remember from Chad's reading that Judah says, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." There is profit in prisons. There is job creation for companies that provide prison food and contracts for companies that make surveillance equipment. Prison means cheap labor, and for women inmates especially, prison means sexual abuses at the hands of male prison guards. Many of us have heard from this pulpit about the cradle-to-prison pipeline in which the increased rate of incarceration in this country targets our children at younger and younger ages. The most disturbing statistic for me argues that Texas and other states use fourth grade reading scores to project the number of prisons they're going to need 10 years later. If the reading scores go down, the plan to build more prisons go up. We are digging pits for fourth graders, 9 years old. Joseph was 17 when his brothers imprisoned him in a pit and sold him into slavery. 17-year-old Joseph. Certainly annoying, certainly arrogant, probably self-centered, perhaps a bit more so than most 17-year-olds. Certainly raised the ire of his brothers. I may have thrown Joseph into the pit if he were my brother. You think I'm going to bow down before you? What? Into the pit with you. But our human family, with increasing disregard and lack of emotion, discards and throws people into the pit. Old people, poor people, troubled people, immigrant people, disabled people, young people, gay people, people of color, irritating people, women and girls. So this is about imprisonment on many levels. Anything and all things that prevent the flourishing of life for the children of God. Joseph's brothers hated him, and they were jealous of him because their father loved him most. We get that. We find ourselves in pits of envy. We feud and we struggle in God's household, and we want to know why. Why does God love you more than me? Why are you the favorite and not me? Why does Joseph's imprisonment story and Chef Jeff's imprisonment story end well, and mine or my loved ones does not? We're also plagued by feelings of apathy and powerlessness. Why do children of God profit from one another's imprisonment, from one another's enslavement? This statistic blew my mind. You know about the privatization of prisons. Well, private prisons nearly went out of business in the late 1990s until they stumbled on a way to turn a profit around immigration. They lobbied for new laws requiring people awaiting deportation hearings to be detained in even greater numbers, and the private prison industry bounced back. In 2012, the for-profit prison industry spent $45 million lobbying federal officials. Guess how much money they made? $5 billion on immigrant detainees alone. $5 billion. These numbers can overwhelm us and leave us asking, well, what can I do? Or thinking it's not really my problem. I argue that you can find one thing and do it, and it is your problem. In this text, one brother, Reuben, sort of intervenes. He manages to thwart the murder plot and get Joseph tossed in a pit rather than killed. He plans to return later and restore Joseph to their father, but that pesky caravan comes by, and oh well, there goes that plan. He tried to save his brother a little. And so you heard the list of discarded people. This is about imprisonment and pits and slavery on many levels. And no, you personally cannot thwart the plots to murder and enslave every child of God. But in God's household, we must do something, one thing, even if we, like Reuben, fail. So what will you do today, this month, this year? There's some suggestions on the back of the bulletin. What pit of fatigue and despair will you rise out of to lift someone else out of their pit? Will you write a letter? Will you educate yourself? Will you sign a petition, find an organization to volunteer with, or donate money to? Sibling rivalry and family feuds are scattered throughout the book of Genesis, but they have no place in God's household. Themes of favoritism and younger over older lead to plots of murder and profit, but they have no place in God's household. In God's household, we will not perpetuate these themes. We will live in God's household like Joseph lived, living the twists and turns, the ups and downs of our lives, hoping to arrive like Joseph at a place of deep faith and great trust that God is with us in life for our whole life, no matter how our story ends. If we think about God's household as having rooms, I want to argue that you don't have to clean the whole house. But my question is, which room are you responsible for? Which part of the house are you cleaning up? Which task are you taking on? Maybe you're on the prison reform bathroom detail. And if the bathroom feels too big a task, I know it does in my house, perhaps you're just focusing on the bathtub as a pen pal to a prison inmate. Maybe your task is baking bread in the kitchen of God's household for all of the discarded, hungry people of the world, or maybe just the neighbor or family member who's hungry. The need is too great, Middle Church, and the call of God on our lives too strong for any of us to be sitting on the couch watching TV in God's household. There are no TVs in God's household. And God willing, there are no couch potatoes either. To God be the glory. Amen.